Maria Delgado, known as the Lady of Myths on her growing YouTube channel, never believed urban legends were anything more than that. Stories meant to scare kids and generate clicks. After several videos debunking vengeful spirits, haunted houses, and gates to hell, her numbers started to plateau. Her audience wanted more. They craved something real, something that would chill them to the bone. Something that would chill them to the bone. That's when a message appeared in her inbox. No sender, just a subject line. The 313 call. The message was brief, almost ominous. Some myths aren't meant to be played with. If you want answers, go to Black Star. But remember, some questions should never be asked. At first, Maria dismissed it as a joke. But the more she investigated Black Star, the stranger things became. A forgotten town nestled in the mountains, inhabited only by a handful of elderly people, and surrounded by abandoned houses. According to stories buried in obscure forums, over the last 50 years, more than a dozen people had vanished there under mysterious circumstances. The only thing connecting these disappearances? A landline phone. A phone that only rang at 3:13 a.m. The journey to Black Star. Maria wasn't easily intimidated. Armed with her camera, at first glance, it seemed ordinary. Old houses, streets littered with dried leaves, and an air of abandonment. But there was something else, a heavy atmosphere, as though unseen eyes watched her from the shattered windows. She found lodging at a dilapidated inn on the edge of a forest. The owner, a hunched man with sunken eyes named Don Lucio, handed her the keys with little to say. But when she mentioned her interest in the phone in the cabin on the hill, Don Lucio's face went pale. That phone, it mustn't be used. If it rings, don't answer it. Maria, don't answer it. Maria, curious and defiant, smiled as she turned on her camera. Is it cursed? The man stared at her. It's not the phone that matters. It's who calls you. A day of exploration, Maria spent most of the day exploring the town, capturing atmospheric shots and interviewing the few remaining residents. Most were elderly, too afraid to talk about the cabin or the phone. However, one woman named Doña Rosa dared to share more. That phone, it connects to something not of this world. My brother Pedro answered it one night, many years ago. For weeks, he acted strangely, muttering things we couldn't understand. Then, he disappeared. All we found was his watch, and it was stopped at 3:13. Doña Rosa's story didn't scare Maria, but it added a layer of authenticity that she knew her audience would love. That night, she climbed the cabin. Setting up the experiment, the cabin was as decrepit as the rest of the town. Dust coated the furniture, and the walls looked ready to collapse. But the phone was there, a black rotary phone sitting on a small table in the main room. Beside it, a chair creaked every time Maria moved. She spent hours setting up her equipment. She positioned a camera facing the phone, a recorder to capture any strange sounds, and her cell phone to document her reactions. Once everything was ready, she sat in front of the phone and waited. The first sign. As the hours passed, Maria noticed strange things. The room's temperature dropped abruptly, though her thermometer showed no change. The furniture creaked as if someone was moving in the shadows. Then, around 3:00 a.m., an oppressive silence filled the space. It wasn't just quiet, It was a void, as though the world had stopped breathing. 3:12 a.m. Maria adjusted her camera, ensuring everything was recording. Her heart raced, but she tried to stay calm. It's just a phone. Nothing's going to happen, she thought. 3:13 a.m. The phone rang, shattering the silence like a scream in the dead of night. Who's on the other end of the line? What will Maria discover if she answers? And, more importantly, will she be able to leave Black Star once she does? The phone's ring was sharp, insistent, like a cry piercing her soul. Maria swallowed hard. Her instincts told her not to answer. But the cameras were rolling, and her audience demanded bravery. In her mind, she could already hear the comments. Fake. She didn't even pick it up. It's just a phone, she whispered to herself, reaching for the receiver. The ringing grew louder with each second, as if the phone had a life of its own. Finally, with a swift motion, she picked up the receiver and held it to her ear. Hello? Silence. But not ordinary silence. It was a void, a palpable emptiness, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Maria glanced at the camera, raising an eyebrow, almost amused. All right, there's nothing here. Myth debunked, she said, trying to sound casual. Then she heard it. At first, it was a faint whisper, like a distant wind swirling through the receiver. Then the words took shape. Maria. Maria. It was her name, repeated in a warped, echoing tone. Who is this? She asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. There was no immediate response, just a strange rustling sound, like someone moving through dry leaves. Then a deep, guttural voice broke the silence. We know what you're doing. Chaos unleashed. Maria felt a chill race down her spine. She dropped the receiver and stumbled back, bumping into the table. The phone emitted a low hum, as though someone was still on the line. Her camera captured everything. Her ragged breathing, the phone's persistent hum, and the oppressive atmosphere. Summoning her courage, she approached the phone again. What is this? A prank? Who are you? She demanded, her voice trembling. The voice responded, clearer but more inhuman. This is not a prank. It's a warning. The hum from the receiver transformed into a deafening noise, a metallic howl mixed with screams. Maria let go of the phone, which hit the floor with a thud. At that moment, all the lights in the cabin went out. The darkness was absolute. The presence. Maria fumbled with her cell phone, turning on its flashlight. The small beam only made the shadows seem more alive. She tried to steady her breathing, whispering to herself. It's nothing. This is just part of the myth. None of this is real. Then she heard it, a soft sound coming from the kitchen, a scraping noise, like something dragging across the wooden floor. Slowly, she approached, the light trembling in her hand. At the kitchen doorway, her flashlight illuminated a figure. It looked like a man, but something was off. His back was to her, his head tilted as if listening to something far away. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his clothes were tattered. Hello, Maria whispered, her voice barely audible. The figure didn't respond. Slowly, it turned its head toward her. Its face was eyeless with deep, empty sockets. Maria stumbled backward in terror. The figure spoke, but its words didn't come from its mouth. They emanated from the phone lying on the floor. You shouldn't have answered. The failed escape, Maria bolted for the front door, her heart pounding. But when she grabbed the doorknob, it wouldn't budge. The door felt like part of the wall, immovable. She banged on it with all her strength. "Let me out. This isn't funny," her screams echoed, mixing with the phone's incessant ringing, though no one had lifted the receiver. From the kitchen, a figure began to move toward her, slow but inevitable, dragging its feet across the wooden floor. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out from outside. It was Don Lucio, shouting desperately, "Maria, get out of there now! Don't listen to it!" Maria looked around frantically and spotted a window at the end of the hallway. Without hesitation, she ran toward it, smashing the glass with her camera. She crawled through the broken frame, cutting herself on the shards, and fell to the ground outside. When she looked back, the cabin was completely dark. The figure wasn't following her, but the phone's ringing still echoed in the night, as if calling out to her. A late warning, Don Lucio helped her to her feet, his face stricken with panic. "I warned you. That phone isn't meant for us." "What is this? What's happening?" Maria shouted, breathless. Lucia's eyes were heavy with sorrow, as though burdened by centuries of grief. "It's not a what. It's a who. And now, it knows who you are." Maria didn't fully understand his words, but one thing was clear. That night, she had awakened something that should never have been disturbed. To be continued. What's next for Maria? What does Don Lucio's warning mean? And what will she do now that it knows her name? The terror has only just begun. Like, subscribe, and don't miss our next video to find out what happens to Maria.